You enter Rome through your nose before your eyes can admire anything. Long before the temples, long before the columns, long before the proud stone arches that later generations will praise. The city reaches into your mouth and throat with a smell so thick it feels chewable. It is not one smell. It is layers. Human sweat dried into wool tunics. Wood smoke hanging low between buildings. Rotting cabbage leaves trampled into mud. Animal dung baking under the sun. Fish sauce spilled from cracked jars and left to sour in the heat. Urine soaking public corners where people relieved themselves because they had little choice. The faint, sweet note of perfume, trying bravely and unsuccessfully to fight all of it. You do not take a clean breath. You negotiate with each one. The road underfoot is alive with residue. Cartwheels grind old filth into the street. Sandals slap through damp patches you do not inspect too closely. Somewhere nearby, a mule snorts over a heap of dung. Somewhere else, a butcher has opened an animal, and the metallic smell of blood rises fresh and hot, only to mix with the stink of drains that do not carry everything away. This is a city of movement, but nothing truly disappears. It is pushed aside, spread thinner, warmed by daylight, then returned to the air. You might imagine the capital of an empire should smell polished, ceremonial, almost divine. Instead, it smells like too many bodies packed into too little space, each one eating, sweating, bleeding, relieving itself, cooking, washing, rotting, and trying to mask the evidence with oil or incense. Rome is magnificent, but it is magnificent in the way a crowded stable might be magnificent if you built it from marble. Your stomach tightens as a breeze shifts and delivers something worse from a nearby alley. Not just waste, not just food gone bad. Something damp, old, and human. Bedding that has not dried properly. Skin that has not healed well. Breath from mouths used to rough wine, onions, and bad teeth. The smell of a city that cannot pause long enough to clean itself faster than it dirties itself. And now you understand the first truth of ancient Rome. You would hate it most with every breath you take. You learn very quickly that Rome does not smell bad in isolated places. It smells bad because almost everything touches everything else. The streets are narrow in many neighborhoods, especially where ordinary people live. Tall apartment blocks crowd close together, shutting out light and trapping heat. Air does not move well here. It lingers. It thickens. It picks up steam from cooking pots, smoke from braziers, sour vapor from chamber pots, and the rank smell of wet plaster, old wood, and bodies sleeping too close together. A single household might contain relatives, laborers, children, tools, scraps of food, and straw bedding that has absorbed months of sweat. Now multiply that by an entire block. You do not move through clean zones and dirty zones. You move through layers of use. A baker opens shop beside a lane where dogs nose through refuse. A cloth seller handles fabric with hands that have already touched coins, doorposts, pack ropes, and animals. A porter shoulders sacks through the crowd, brushing tunics and bare arms as he passes. Someone empties waste from an upper story into the street below, not always with perfect warning. The city does not offer distance. It offers contact. Markets are among the worst for this. They are lively, loud, and absolutely saturated with smell. Crushed herbs, fresh bread, olive oil, hot meat, fish, mud, manure, stale wine, and human breath all compete at once. Buyers squeeze past one another. Sellers shout over flies. Children dart between legs. Animals are tethered nearby, adding their own steaming contribution. Everything is handled. Fruit is picked up and set down. Loaves are pressed. Jars are opened. Coins pass from hand to hand, damp with sweat and grime. Rome's economy runs on touch. You cannot simply stay home and avoid it. Home is not a sealed refuge. It is another chamber inside the same breathing organism. Water must be fetched. Food must be bought. Laundry must be carried. Waste must be removed somehow. Work must be done if you are poor. And most people are not rich enough to retreat into airy villas with private arrangements. Day laborers, shopkeepers, servants, launders, cooks, dock workers, and carters do not survive by withdrawing. They survive by showing up where the smell is worst. Even public convenience adds to the burden. Shared latrines sit close to daily life. Bathhouses, though cleaner than many modern people assume, gather large numbers of sweating bodies in humid rooms. Workshops produce their own reek. Tanneries work with urine and animal skins. Fullers clean cloth with substances no sensitive nose would ever forgive. The city is a machine powered by labor, and labor has an odor. That is what makes Rome oppressive. The smell is not accidental. It is the scent of density, survival, and constant human friction. You cannot stop eating just because the city smells like something already half digested. By morning, hunger drives you into the food system of Rome, which is impressive in scale and deeply unromantic up close. Grain arrives in enormous quantities to feed the population, and bread becomes the backbone of daily survival. It sounds reassuring until you consider the route it takes. Grain is hauled, stored, shifted, milled, baked, stacked, sold, and carried through a city full of dust, rodents, insects, sweat, and open traffic. Flour drifts into the air and settles on skin and work surfaces that are never as clean as you might hope. Bakers work in heat, surrounded by ash, damp sacks, and laboring bodies. Fresh loaves smell wonderful for a moment, but even that comfort lives inside a harsher world of smoke and grime. Water should be safer. Rome is famous for aqueducts, and rightly so. Fresh water did reach fountains, baths, and wealthier houses on an impressive scale. But your drinking experience depends on class, location, storage, and timing. Water often sits in containers, travels through crowded households, or waits in vessels that are not shining examples of sanitation. A jar left open invites dust. A ladle shared by several mouths offers no special courtesy to the next person. Cisterns and storage tanks can turn stale. Pipes and channels solve part of the problem, not all of it. Clean delivery does not guarantee clean handling, so you often drink wine mixed with water, or cheap sour wine that is safer mostly because it has become unfriendly to some forms of life. Even then, the cup is another problem. Shared cups are common enough. The rim carries traces of the last drinker, and the last drinker may have spent the morning shouting in a market, coughing in a workshop, or chewing onions with gums that bleed. Roman conviviality is not built around personal space. Then there is fish sauce, the famous fermented condiment poured into cooking across the empire. In careful production, it was valuable and prized. But in the daily air of a market, its smell can be brutal. Salty, pungent, almost aggressively alive. It clings to stalls, amphorae, and hands. Add olives from jars, cheese sweating in the heat, beans stewing in shared pots, and bits of meat of uncertain freshness. And your meal becomes less a refined Roman feast and more a practical act of surrender. Street food is fast and useful, especially if you have no kitchen worth trusting. It is also exposed to flies, dust, smoke, and the touch of strangers. Storage vessels keep food available, but not eternally wholesome. Heat speeds everything along. A stew can move from hearty to suspicious, faster than dignity allows. Yet refusal is a luxury. You eat because labor demands strength. You drink because thirst does not negotiate. Rome feeds you, but it does so with hands that have touched the whole city first. You eventually discover that Rome is not indifferent to cleanliness. It is simply trapped between genuine washing and impossible conditions. This is where modern fantasies usually begin to wobble. People in ancient Rome did care about bathing, grooming, oils, scraping the skin, laundering cloth, and presenting a body that looked civilized. Public baths were not rare curiosities. They were a central feature of urban life. Many Romans washed far more regularly than lazy stereotypes suggest. But regular bathing did not produce a city that smelled fresh. It produced a city trying very hard to manage the smell of being crowded, busy, and relentlessly physical. Inside the baths, the experience is not pure cleanliness in the modern sense. The rooms are humid with steam, wet stone, lamp smoke, sweat, perfume, and wet wool. Bodies gather in large numbers. Skin is rubbed with oil, then scraped with a strigil, pulling away dirt and sweat in satisfying ribbons that are less glamorous when you picture where they go. Water is present in abundance compared with many other ancient places, but shared facilities bring their own reality. The bathhouse smells better than a drain or tannery. Certainly, yet it is still full of human residue. It is hygiene as mass participation, not sterile isolation. At home, washing is less dramatic. You use basins, cloths, oils, and what water you can afford to fetch or store. Clothes are aired, beaten, mended, and reused because cloth is valuable. Bedding is shaken out rather than magically renewed. Floors are swept, but dust returns. Walls absorb smoke. Mats hold odor. A room can be tidied and still smell faintly of old cooking, damp fabric, and tired bodies. Cleanliness in Rome often means control, not elimination. Medicine works much the same way. Roman medical thought was not empty foolishness. It had observation, regimen, and practical habits behind it. Physicians discussed diet, exercise, air, seasons, digestion, and the balance of the body. They recognized that foul environments mattered. They noticed that certain places seemed unhealthy. But knowledge was mixed with theories that could mislead just as easily as they could guide. Bad air was feared, not without reason, because foul smells often did accompany dangerous conditions. Yet smell itself could be mistaken for the cause rather than the warning. So people fought odor with smoke, incense, herbs, resins, garlands, and perfume oils. Rooms were fumigated, temples filled with incense. People wore scent as both pleasure and defense. The irony is almost cruel. The sweet smell did not erase the source beneath it. It floated over it, like a polite guest pretending not to notice a corpse in the cellar. Remedies could be practical, soothing, symbolic, or absurd. Herbal salves, wine washes, poultices, and dietary rules sat beside charms, omens, prayers, and household superstition. Bloodletting existed. So did confidence in substances whose reputation exceeded their usefulness. The line between treatment and ritual was often thin. If you feel unwell in Rome, you may be cleaned, perfumed, scraped, prayed over, and advised to breathe better air, all while living in a city that keeps handing your lungs the same old mixture. That is the bitter joke. Rome believed in hygiene. Rome invested in baths, drains, grooming, and care of the body. Rome simply could not wash away density, industry, poverty, and heat. The civilization that polished marble statues also lived inside a permanent cloud of sweat, smoke, damp fabric, oil, and waste. People were not filthy because they loved filth. They were fighting a losing battle against the smell produced by urban life itself. If you want the full truth of Rome, you have to leave the postcard version behind and follow the smell to where the city actually functions. The grand avenues and public monuments still exist. Of course, politicians still pose. Priests still burn incense. Marble still catches the sun beautifully. But none of that tells you what the empire rests on. For that, you go where the air turns heavy and practical, near the slaughtering areas. The smell hits first as iron, fresh blood, then comes the deeper note underneath it. Warm organs, opened stomachs, damp hides, singed hair, and the sweet edge of decay, beginning its work almost as soon as the animal falls. Rome eats on a vast scale, and feeding a metropolis means killing at scale too. The process is fast, physical, and messy. Knives open flesh. Gut contents spill. Buckets fill. Drains carry some of it away. Flies arrive like officials collecting tax. Even when the work is efficient, the air becomes thick with hot animal life turning into meat. Not far from this, tanneries and related trades produce a different kind of assault. Raw hides do not become leather politely. They arrive carrying the memory of the animal. Hair must be loosened, flesh scraped, surfaces treated, softened, preserved. Urine is useful in some industrial processes across the Roman world, including cloth treatment by fullers and other grimly practical trades. That means vats, soaked materials, fermented stench, and laborers standing deep in the chemistry of necessity. You smell ammonia, rot, wet skin, and the sour bitterness of substances that no luxury customer wants to think about while admiring the finished product. Then come the drains and sewers, famous in Roman engineering and often misunderstood by people who assume a drain automatically means cleanliness. A sewer is only as comforting as the waste entering it and the conditions around it. Some of Rome's drainage was impressive, but the city still produced more filth than any system could magically erase. Open gutters, runoff, blocked channels, refuse heaps, and the simple habit of throwing waste where one could all help feed the atmosphere. On hot days, the smell rising from drainage lines is not subtle. It is fecal, sour, wet, and strangely old. As if the city has been digesting itself for centuries and never quite finished swallowing. Public latrines make the lesson even more intimate. They are communal, practical, and efficient in a Roman way that modern people often romanticize until they imagine sitting there. Stone seats line up side by side. There is little privacy. Beneath you, waste moves or waits depending on design and maintenance. Around you are the smells of human digestion in all its forms, sharpened by heat and amplified by enclosed architecture. Shared sponges and washing arrangements remind you that convenience was never the same as comfort. A latrine in active use is not merely unpleasant. It is a place where the body is reduced to process, stripped of dignity by routine. Tenement districts may be worse in a slower way. Nothing there explodes on the senses like a slaughterhouse. Instead, odor accumulates by endurance. Too many people sleep in too little space. Cooking smoke blackens ceilings. Chamber pots linger until emptied. Clothing dries badly in cramped interiors. Rain wets walls and then leaves them to sour. Bedding traps oil from skin, stale breath, spilled drink, sick sweat, and whatever fleas or lice find worth inhabiting. Babies need cleaning. The elderly lose control of bodily functions. The sick remain indoors because they have nowhere else to go. A wealthy visitor can leave such a building after a few minutes and wrinkle his nose. You have to imagine what it means to stay there for years. The smell of sickness deserves its own place in your memory. It is not the theatrical plague smell people invent for stories. It is more intimate and more disturbing than that. Fever has a smell. So does infected skin. So do unwashed wounds, swollen gums, vomit in straw, diarrhea in shared rooms, and breath from someone too ill to rise. Roman medicine could be observant and sometimes useful, but ordinary illness still lived very close to ordinary life. There were no antiseptic wards sealed off from the household. If someone suffered, the room suffered with them. The blanket, the mat, the cup, the basin, the air, all of it joined the event. Even death does not always leave quickly enough to spare the living. Cemeteries were generally kept beyond sacred boundaries. But funeral movement, mourning rites, cremation smoke, and the handling of bodies still added their own sensory mark to the city. Poorer burials, delays in disposal, and the ordinary arithmetic of mortality meant that death was never as invisible as modern infrastructure makes it. Burned flesh from cremation pyres, resin, smoke, flowers, and grief formed another mixture Rome knew too well. Not constant everywhere, but close enough to remind you that the empire was full of bodies in every stage of use and loss. What makes the worst smells linger is not carelessness alone. It is scale. Rome is too large, too alive, too industrious, too unequal, and too dependent on human and animal labor to smell clean for long. Every comfort creates residue. Every meal leaves scraps. Every trade has runoff. Every body contributes. The city masters water, stone, roads, law, and conquest, yet still cannot solve the oldest urban fact. Put enough life in one place and the air itself begins to taste used. That is the smell that follows you. Not one alley, not one latrine, not one dead animal. The concentrated truth of a civilization whose greatness was built in places your nose would never let you forget. After enough days in Rome, the worst change is not in the air, it is in you. At first your body protests everything. You flinch at the gutter. You pull your sleeve across your nose in the market. You hesitate outside a latrine. You taste the city in every meal and resent it. Then something more unsettling begins. You adapt, not because Rome grows cleaner, but because your senses grow tired. The brain, merciful and slightly treacherous, stops sounding the alarm at full volume. What should remain shocking becomes background. You still notice sudden bursts of horror, a fresh carcass, a blocked drain, a room where sickness has settled too long, but the daily fog of sweat, smoke, dung, oil, and damp cloth becomes ordinary. That numbness has a cost. Once you accept the smell, you also accept the conditions that produce it. You stop expecting privacy. You stop expecting distance. You stop imagining that the body deserves much comfort. Your own skin becomes part of the environment. Your tunic carries the day on it. Smoke from the cook fire, street dust, sour perspiration, a touch of oil, maybe the sharp ghost of urine from some public corner you brushed past too closely. You go to sleep inside the city and wake up wearing it again. This changes how people live together. Tolerance becomes a social skill. You learn not to recoil too obviously at another person's breath, their labor smell, their damp clothing, their tired body. Everyone is exposed. Everyone carries traces of work and weather. A porter smells different from a perfumed diner, but neither exists outside the same shared atmosphere. Dignity survives by pretending not to notice what cannot be fixed. And yet smell still marks status. Wealth buys some distance. Better airflow, cleaner storage, more frequent laundering, servants to remove waste, and perfume strong enough to announce privilege before a word is spoken. Poverty means enclosure. It means sleeping above shops, beside workshops, near animals, near refuse, in rooms where the wall itself seems to perspire. The city is democratic only in the sense that everyone breathes it. It is cruelly unequal in how much of it each person must endure. Children grow up inside this without ever choosing it. Laborers age faster in it. Women managing households confront its endless intimacy through bedding, cooking, laundry, waste, and care of the sick. Enslaved people bear the smells of other people's comfort. The nose becomes a record of power. Some people purchase scent. Others absorb the cost of everything that stinks. So Rome teaches a hard lesson. Human beings can get used to almost anything, even conditions they should hate. Survival does not always look heroic. Sometimes it looks like learning not to react when the air itself has become an insult. What you end up hating is not simply the stink itself. It is what the stink reveals. Ancient Rome loved order in theory. It loved straight roads, measured water, public monuments, legal categories, military discipline, civic pride. It liked to imagine itself as a machine of civilization rising above the chaos of lesser places. But your nose keeps reporting a different truth. Order did exist, brilliantly in some cases. Yet it sat on top of a vast daily struggle with waste, crowding, labor, hunger, animals, sickness, and human bodies that could never be reduced to marble ideals. That is why the smell matters. It breaks the illusion. It tells you where the empire is honest. Not in speeches, not in statues, not in polished rhetoric about virtue, but in kitchens, workshops, drains, stairwells, bathhouses, alleys, and market stalls. The scent of Rome is the scent of an enormous organism consuming resources and producing residue every hour. Greatness did not float above the filth. Greatness depended on someone carrying it out, scraping it off, washing around it, walking through it, or sleeping beside it. There is also something strangely human in that. The city is not disgusting because Romans were uniquely backward or careless. It is disgusting because they were successful enough to gather huge numbers of people into one place and keep them alive, fed, entertained, employed, and moving. Their engineering was real. Their hygiene efforts were real. Their perfumes, baths, drains, and laundries were real. So was the limit of all those systems when pressed by density and inequality. You hate ancient Rome because it refuses to smell like legend. It smells like people, too many people, too close together, trying to live well while surrounded by the evidence that living is messy. Sweat, smoke, oil, blood, sewage, damp wool, cheap wine, fish sauce, incense, and decay all become part of the same imperial breath. And in that sense, the odor of Rome is more than unpleasant. It is the smell of civilization telling the truth about itself.